The bishop's buggy was already sitting in our driveway when I came in from the fields. I saw it through the gap in the barn door, and I went completely still, my hands still carrying the dirt of the garden, something happening in my chest that I had no word for. I knew why he had come. 3 days earlier, my mother had told me, quietly, over the bread she was working on the counter, not once lifting her eyes to meet mine, that a man named Eli Beer had gone to my father, that my father had given his answer, and that the bishop was coming to make it right before the church. I was 16 years old. I had never once been alone in a conversation with Eli Beer, and standing in that barn doorway, watching the bishop's horse lower its head to drink from the trough, as though this were an ordinary afternoon, I made a decision I did not yet know would take everything I had ever loved from me. I turned around. I walked back into the fields. I did not go inside. What followed that refusal reshaped the way my entire community saw me. Within days, women who had sat beside me at church moved elsewhere. Mothers who might have mentioned my name to their sons stopped doing so, and for the first time in my life, I understood how completely a person could vanish without ever taking a single step away from home. By the time it was over, I had lost my standing in the district, my place at the center of things, and very nearly my family. I need to tell you exactly how that happened, because if you believe that saying no in an Amish community is simply a private matter between a girl and a man, you do not yet understand what that word actually costs. Let me explain something that most people outside the Amish world get fundamentally wrong when they hear the words arranged marriage. I already know the objection. The Amish don't arrange marriages. Girls have a choice. And that is technically accurate in the way that a person standing at the edge of a cliff technically has the choice of whether to step forward. Here is how courtship actually functioned in my community. A girl begins attending Sunday singings at 16. A young man starts offering her buggy rides home. In a district of 200 or 300 people, there are perhaps 8 to 12 boys of eligible age. That is the entirety of the pool. You did not select the pool. The pool was determined by geography and birth, and the particular church district your grandfather had settled into before you existed. And here is what no one says plainly. The first refusal is manageable. You are 16, the match isn't right, people nod and move forward. The second refusal is harder. By the third, people stop asking what you are looking for in a husband. They start asking what is wrong with you. By 17, a girl who has said no too many times is no longer admired for her discernment. She becomes a topic. Is she proud? Is she concealing something? Is her faith not what it appears? The social cost of refusing accumulates the way snow accumulates. Each flake so small you barely register it until the weight of it is bending every branch around you. My mother was 17 when she married my father. She told me once, and only once, that she had not been in love with him when they married. I asked her, standing beside her at the stove, whether she had wanted to marry him at all. She stirred the pot. A long silence passed. Then she said, "Lavina, wanting was not the point. Yielding was." I was 12 years old. I carried those words like a stone in my pocket for 4 years, turning them over and over without yet understanding how heavy they were going to become. I need to tell you about Eli Beer. Not because he was a bad man. He was not, and I want to be precise about that, because the easiest telling of this story requires a villain, and the truth is more uncomfortable than that. Eli was 24, eldest son of one of the most respected families in our district. His father held more farmland than almost anyone around us, and in the Amish world, land is not simply wealth. It is the future itself, what you pass to your sons and what they pass to theirs. A girl who married into the Beer family was considered a girl whose future had been secured. Eli was not unkind to look at. He spoke deliberately, the way men do when they have been raised to believe their words carry weight and have decided to take that seriously. At community gatherings, he was always courteous toward me, respectful even. The problem was not Eli. The problem was that a decision had been made about my life in a room I was never invited into. My father told me on a Tuesday evening. He called me to sit with him on the porch after supper. He told me that Eli had spoken well of me, that his family was sound, that the bishop considered it a good match. He did not ask what I thought. He told me what had been decided. I sat very still. I folded my hands in my lap. I looked out at the fields going gold in the late light, and I said very quietly, "I don't want to marry Eli Beer." The silence that came after was not ordinary silence. It was the silence of something cracking inside a wall. My father looked at me for a long moment, not with anger exactly, with something I can only now identify as genuine bewilderment. The bewilderment of a man who has just been told that what he believed to be solid ground is not. He said, "That is not how this works, Lavina." I said, "I know." And that was how it began. I want to walk you through the 3 weeks that followed, because they did not arrive the way people might imagine. There was no shouting, no locked doors, no single confrontation that stood apart from everything else. What happened was far quieter than that, and in many ways, far more suffocating. The first thing that happens when an Amish girl refuses a sanctioned match is that the women begin to visit. My aunt came first, 2 days after my conversation with my father. She sat at our kitchen table, with her hands wrapped around her coffee cup, and she spoke to me for an hour about the blessings of a good marriage, about the Beer family's character, about how a girl's feelings at 16 were not the same as wisdom. She was warm, she was gentle, she was a woman I loved, and beneath every word she spoke was the same message, dressed so carefully in softness that I almost didn't recognize it for what it was. You do not get to want what you want. That is not what women here are for. Then came the minister's wife, kinder in manner but clearer in purpose. She spoke about yielding, about trusting the men God had placed in authority. She said a girl who truly trusted God would trust the men God had set over her. She looked at me with eyes that held what I can only describe as genuine sorrow and said, "Lavina, I worry about your heart. I worry it is being led somewhere that will bring you pain." And I thought, it is already bringing me pain. But I said nothing, because I was 16, and had not yet understood that silence is its own kind of answer. The third visitor was one I had not expected. Eli Beer's mother came alone on a Thursday afternoon. She was not unkind, but there was something in her bearing that reminded me of stone, dense and weathered and impossible to shift. She told me her son was a good man. I agreed. She told me the match was right. I said I wasn't certain. She looked at me for a long moment and then said something I have thought about nearly every day since I left. She said, "Child, the girls who refuse good men do not find better ones. They find older ones, or they find no one, or they discover that their community no longer has a place for them. Is that the life you want?" I felt something drop in my stomach, not because she was being cruel, but because she was being honest. She was telling me the truth about what happened to girls who said no. She had watched it happen. She genuinely believed she was offering me a kindness. And the most terrible part is that within the mechanics of that world, she was right. Here is what I need you to understand about what happens to an Amish girl who refuses. It is not dramatic. It does not arrive all at once. It is a slow process of becoming invisible, and it is more devastating than any punishment that could have been openly declared, because you cannot point to it. You cannot go to anyone and say, "This was done to me," because technically nothing was done. You were simply no longer at the center. The community went on around you. You were still present, but no longer quite real, no longer quite counted, no longer quite included in anyone's sense of the future. Within a week of my refusal becoming known, things began shifting in ways so small you would miss them if you were not the one living inside them. A girl I had sat beside at singings for 2 years suddenly always seemed to find her seat somewhere else. An older woman, who'd always greeted me warmly, became pleasant, but brief, her attention already moving elsewhere before her words had finished. The young men my age, the ones whose mothers might once have quietly mentioned my name in the particular way that Amish matchmaking actually works, stopped looking in my direction entirely. I was not shunned. I was not disciplined. Nothing the bishop could have pointed to in a sermon had been done to me. I was simply being shown, carefully, and without pause, what the remainder of my life would look like if I kept saying no. There was a woman I grew up alongside named Ruth. She had refused a boy at 17, a quiet refusal, never made official, just a series of signals everyone around her understood. By the time she was 22, no serious approach had come her way again. She worked in her parents' household, cared for her younger siblings, attended church every Sunday, smiled at everyone, was kind to everyone, and was quietly and completely alone. I used to watch her at community gatherings, this woman who had simply asked to have some hand in shaping her own life, and I could see what had been done to her without a single word ever being spoken. She had not been punished. She had been made peripheral, and the community had simply kept moving, filling in the space where her future should have been, as if it had never existed. 3 weeks after my refusal, my father called me to sit with him again. It was evening. The lamp was burning. My mother was in the next room, and I knew she was listening. He did not speak for a long time. When he finally did, his voice was quieter than I had ever heard it. My father was not a soft man. He had been built from work and weather and faith. But that night, he sounded like something that had been holding its shape for a very long time and had grown tired of the effort. He said, "I am not asking you to love him today, Lavina. I am asking you to trust that love can grow." And I saw it then, the thing underneath the request. He was not simply asking me to marry Eli Beer. He was asking me to be the kind of daughter he could hand forward into the future without losing the structure that made his world hold together. He was asking me to be proof that his faith had worked, that the life he had built was real and right and worth continuing. He was not a villain. He was a man who loved me inside the only understanding of love he had ever been given. I remember sitting across from him in that lamplit room and thinking, I love you completely, and I cannot do this. I started crying before I could prevent it, which I hated because I had told myself I wouldn't. My father looked away toward the window, and I could see that he was also trying not to. We sat like that for a long time, two people who loved each other on opposite sides of something neither of us had built and neither of us knew how to cross. Finally, I said, "Dad, if I do this, if I marry him, in 20 years when you look at me, will you see me or will you only see the choice I made?" He didn't answer. He stood. He placed his hand on my shoulder for one brief moment, the way men in our community expressed what they could not bring themselves to say aloud. Then he walked out. I think that was the night I understood what was actually being asked of me. The question was never really about Eli Beer. The question was whether I was a person or a function, whether I existed to carry the community forward, to validate the Ordnung, to become evidence that the system worked, or whether I was something distinct from all of that, something with its own interior, its own direction, its own irreducible need to be known before it was given away. I understood what was being asked, and I understood that I could not give it. I left 3 months later. I was 19 by then. The situation with Eli Beer had been quietly set aside. He had moved forward. There were other girls. The community had absorbed the disruption the way water closes over a stone dropped into it. But I had been changed by what I had seen, in a way that could not be reversed. I had seen the architecture of the thing. I could not stop seeing it. I want to say something honest about leaving because people imagine it as a door you walk through and then it is finished. Leaving is a series of small losses. It is waking up in a room that is not your childhood room and reaching instinctively for a sound, your mother's voice moving through the house, the particular creak of your father's step on the stairs, and finding only silence instead. It is sitting in a waiting room filling out a form and reaching the line that says emergency contact and holding your pen above the paper for a very long time. My mother wrote letters for the first year. Careful letters, close to the edges of things, full of the farm and the weather and who had married and who had been born, and carefully, always, carefully, never mentioning the shape of my absence from any of it. My father did not write. He sent one message through my mother. 7 words. We pray for you. Come home soon. I am 26 now. I have built a life that is real and mine and full in ways I did not know life could be full. But I will not pretend it did not cost what it cost. I lost the smell of my mother's kitchen. I lost Sunday mornings in a language I still sometimes dream in. I lost the particular safety of a world where every person around you has known you since before you had words. I did not lose myself. And I have come to understand that was the one thing the system was never designed to let me keep. About 2 years after I left, I was sitting with a woman who became one of the most important people in my life. She has silver earrings and a shelf of plants she tends between sessions, and a way of listening that makes you feel your words are landing somewhere solid. I had been telling her about the barn doorway, the bishop's buggy, my father's porch, the slow erasure, the women at the kitchen table. I was telling it in pieces, the way you dismantle something that might still be unstable. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Do you know what they were actually afraid of?" I told her I had always assumed it was about the community's reputation, the disruption to the Ordnung. She shook her head slowly. She said, "They were afraid of what you were proving, that a girl could look honestly at the life being offered to her, weigh it, and find it not enough, and survive the refusing. Because if you could do that, if you could say no and still be standing, then so could every other girl who was watching you." I sat with that for weeks, because she was right. The real stakes of my refusal were never about me and Eli Beer. The stakes were about every 16-year-old girl in that community who was watching what happened to the girl who said no. Whether she disappeared, whether the cost was as absolute as everyone implied, whether it was survivable. I am telling you now from the other side of it. It is survivable. I want to leave you with something true. There is a version of this story where the girl in the barn doorway turns back, walks inside, sits across from the bishop with her hands folded and her heart folded, and says the word everyone is waiting for. That life is not nothing. The women who lived it are not weak. The community that shaped me gave me things I still carry. A capacity for hard work that has held me through every difficult year. A faith that is wounded and remade, but still present. A sense of belonging so deep it had a texture you could feel. I do not want to erase any of that. But there is also this version. The one where the girl turns around. The one where she walks back into the fields. Where the refusal costs everything it costs, and she pays it, and she is still standing. If you are somewhere right now where you are being asked to quietly step into a life that was built for a version of you that was never quite real, I see you. If you have been told that your feelings, at whatever age you are, do not constitute wisdom, that the people above you understand better what your life should hold, I see you. If you have already refused something and you are living in the middle of what that refusal cost, and you are not yet certain it was worth it, I want to tell you something no one told me. You are not too much. You were placed in a container that was too small. And the difference between those two things matters more than they ever wanted you to know. If any part of this stayed with you, leave it in the comments. Your story, your name, whatever you are ready to give. You are never as alone as the silence made you feel. Whatever voice you were told did not belong to you, it was always yours. Even when an entire world was constructed to make you forget it.